So I wanted to begin by saying thank you for making me record this. It gave me an excuse to do my hair and makeup in this quarantine. I think it's like week 3, and this is probably the first time I put any makeup on, so thank you. This test definitely made me, it hit me hard because right now we're in the middle of Lent, or really towards the end of Lent, and so the definitions of the different versions of hell through different authors' eyes really kind of hit close to home. So kind of just to jump straight into it, to compare the two of Dante's Inferno and Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, I think the obvious comparison would definitely be the idea of a journey or a path through hell. One of the things that struck me is that you have to get through the very bad parts, and it gets harder as you go along before it gets better. And so in Heart of Darkness, the journey is definitely represented by traveling down a riverbank and encountering different forms of demons along the way. Whether it's, cannibals or angry managers or, vengeful companies, whatever the case is, Marlowe really encounters a lot of different troubles and demons along the way. And so I wanted to kind of refer to a quote that he describes the actual physical journey and the environment around him. He does say that the great walls of vegetation, an exuberant and entangled mass of trunks, branches, leaves, boughs, festoons, motionless in the moonlight, was like a rioting invasion of soundless life. A rolling wave of plants piled up crested, ready to topple over the creek, to sweep every little man of us out of his little existence. That is on page 26. He also states that you would lose your way on that river as you would in a desert, and butted all day along against shoals, trying to find the channel, till you thought yourself bewitched and cut off forever from everything you had known once, somewhere far away in another existence, perhaps, on page 30. It just definitely feels like it's not a normal path down, a normal river. It's entangled in unknown and things that seem dangerous and really scare him as a person. And then in the Inferno, Dante literally has to go through different levels of hell. He states it, I am in the third circle of the torments, here to all the time with neither pause nor change, the frozen rain of hell descends in torrents. And that is in Canto 19. It's on page 54. And this really makes me think about the Ladder to Heaven. As a Greek Orthodox, we have an icon called the Ladder of Divine Ascent. And it is, I'm technologically illiterate, so I probably won't be able to put this in here. But it is a ladder that, as a Christian is climbing and gets closer and closer to heaven, he has more troubles, and there are demons trying to pull him off, and it gets worse as he gets up to the top of the ladder, and so it's harder for him to reach the end. And so it really made me think about that, going through both journeys, really, going through Heart of Darkness, where Marlowe just encounters, he encounters problem after problem going to find Kurtz, and it just seems to get harder and harder towards the end, and it seems almost helpless, as if he's never going to be able to find Kurtz, never going to be able to hear the words that come from his mouth, or to know his purpose or what his intentions are. And then the same thing for the Inferno. I think what really hit me the most was definitely the 8th circle. Just the different pockets within it kind of scared me with how extreme it got. Definitely where, the hypocrites have to wear robes of lead and walk over Caiaphas, the priest who condemned Jesus to crucifixion. Is just such an intense description and depiction of what goes on, and it just seems to get worse and worse as every single canto keeps going and every circle keeps going. It starts out with I don't want to call it simple sins, but it starts with Dante's journey starts with the pagans who don't know Christ and therefore don't have the chance to sin in Christianity, and that's kind of the first circle of hell that they encounter, and then it just progressively gets worse and worse from there. And so that really it reminded me of that icon called the Ladder of Divine Ascent, where it just gets harder and harder as you go along. And that one really hit close to home. So the Ladder Circle of Hell also include different pockets. In Canto 21, Dante states that we checked our steps to study the next fosse and the next vain lamentations of Malebolge, which kind of just has to add to the idea that he keeps going through all these different lamentations and all these different pockets, even though, you know, each circle's intent within itself, the latter really get more, they expand a lot more because there's more pockets in each one. It almost feels like that multiple choice test where you're like, oh, there's only 10 questions, and then you get down to 8, 9, and 10, and there's like 8A, 8B, 8C, all the way down, and so it just feels like it gets pretty intense towards the end. A second comparison that I would definitely like to bring up is the idea of those who are in hell are trying to bring down those who travel it through, as well as the idea that they are all men and not inhuman. In Heart of Darkness, the savages try to kill the crew with arrows through the fog. And the quote is that they howled and leaped and spun and made horrid faces, but what thrilled you was just the thought of their humanity, like yours, the thought of your remote kinship with this wild and passionate uproar. Ugly, yes, it was ugly enough, but if you were man enough, you would admit to yourself that there was in you just the faintest trace of a response to the terrible frankness of that noise, a dim suspicion of there being a meaning in it which you so remote from the night of first ages, could comprehend. And that's from Joseph Conrad on page 32. The thing that struck me the most out of reading these different encounters was the fact that these men are almost insinuated to be monsters, but you're reminded of their humanity throughout the book. You're reminded that these are men who commit these acts, and the reader is a man as well. You know, all of humanity is capable of committing these types of things, no matter how terrible they may be. And so it really brings to question the idea of what a monster is considered to be, because none of these men have, you know, crazy superpowers or villainous traits that would entail them to do this. They're really just men. And so the idea that as both Dante and Marlowe are traveling through on their routes, there are different men trying to bring them down with them and trying to encapture them within their sins. So in Heart of Darkness, Marlowe describes the attack of the savages as though a veil had been removed from my eyes. I made out deep in the tangled gloom, naked breasts, arms, legs, glaring eyes. The bush was swarming with human limbs in movement, glistening of bronze color. The twigs shook, swayed, and rustled, and arrows flew out of them, and then the shudder came to. And that's listed on page 40. And in the Inferno, within the 8th circle on the 7th pouch, I'm going to be listing the 8th circle a lot because that was the one that hit me the hardest. In the 8th circle on the 7th pouch, the sinners are vipers who have to bite others in order to temporarily restore themselves. In Canto 24, it's listed that no mortal pen, however fast it flashed over the page, could write down O or I as quickly as he flamed and fell in ash, and when he was dissolved into a heap upon the ground, the dust rose of itself and immediately resumed its former shape. That's listed within page 191. I mean, that image alone of these men are in hell, they turn into vipers and have to bite another man in order to resume their own shape, is just another level of insanity. The fact that they're already in hell, and yet they're trying to bring those around them down to push themselves up, and to resume their own former shapes. So it really struck me, the comparison of those who are in hell or are in some sort of torment are trying to bring those around them down as if their own sin wasn't enough. A third point that I would definitely like to bring up is the fog that covers up a part of each of their journeys. In the Inferno, in the 9th circle of hell, a misty figure appears, and in Canto 34 it is quoted, like a whirling windmill seen afar at twilight, or when a mist has risen from the ground, just such an engine rose upon my sight. And that's the scene right before the three-headed Lucifer appears. And then within Heart of Darkness, the fog appears after Marlowe's crew uses the wood that was left for them. And it's stated on page 35 that when the sun rose, there was a white fog, very warm and clammy and more blinding than the night. And what was interesting to me is that they both covered the last portion of their journeys right before they reached Lucifer and Kurtz. And so to me, it seemed like they're going through this journey and through this path to get to the very end, and there's this immense fog covering whatever is left for them, and it makes it unknown, and it makes it more intense to feel that something at the end, which is really unknown, is going to be covered to the point where you won't be able to see it, and you won't be able to know what, I don't want to call it the last level of hell is, but the last adversary that you would really reach within hell. And so I found that very interesting that it came right at the end, you know. Obviously, anything that else would have come from their journey would have been unforeseen, but the fact that the last adversary that they would reach would be completely covered and unseen really just makes it that much more important. My fourth point, I would say the comparison of the guides that take the main characters through their journeys. And one of the guides is obviously Virgil. He takes Dante through the circles of hell and is explanatory with everything with him. But Marlowe really encounters so many different people on his journey that I want to say his steamboat is his guide, really. So for Virgil in the Inferno, in Canto 24, Dante stops and asks to investigate one of the circles before moving on to fully understand it. And so Virgil tells him, "I make no other answer than the act." The master said, "The only fit reply to a fit request is silence and the fact." So he allows Dante to go and explore the other circle of hell, and he doesn't really stop him. He is cautious to a point where he's like, you know, don't tread too close, and, you know, don't let them touch you and things like that, but he doesn't stunt his curiosity with it. And so I thought he was very interesting. He's a guide that takes Dante through to the end. He's more of an informative guide, almost like a tour guide, if you will, that answers any questions that Dante has. And Virgil seems to be more exploratory and less afraid somehow than that of the guide of Heart of Darkness. I don't want to personify the steamboat so much, but I do. The boat breaks down and it needs repairs quite often. And it's slow on this journey, which forces Marlowe to be aware of his surroundings. He studies his journey more in depth because of it. And whereas Virgil allows Dante to explore and understand each circle and pouch, the boat forces Marlowe to understand and to pay attention to what's going on around him. So while waiting for the rivets to arrive to fix the boat, for example, Marlowe overhears a conversation between the manager and his nephew. And they state that Marlowe is able to, quote, see Kurtz for the first time. It was a distinct glimpse, the dugout, 4 paddling savages, and the lone white man turning his back suddenly on the headquarters, on relief, on thoughts of home perhaps, setting his face towards the depths of the wilderness, towards his empty and desolate station. That's listed on page 28. So Marlowe really had to pay attention, and he had to infer from his surroundings and listen to what was going on. If the boat hadn't broken down and the managers hadn't been upset about the situation, about not reaching Kurtz in time, Marlowe would not have been able to form his initial picture of what Kurtz would have looked like. Kurtz is a mysterious man all throughout Marlowe's travels. And so the fact that the boat breaks down and allows Marlowe to hear this conversation between the manager and his nephew for the first time really allows him to get a depiction of what Kurtz looks like, or what he would imagine Kurtz's personality to be like. And then the fifth comparison that I would like to bring up would be the idea of a female temptress. There's quite a few female figures listed in the Inferno, but within Heart of Darkness there's really not that many. And in the Heart of Darkness, obviously the one that stands out the most is the mistress, Kurtz's mistress, once they go and rescue him and then notice her standing on the shore. And the way that she is described is almost like a siren, where she's got these qualities that are commanding, and they control men and trick them into following her. Like, she's got this sex appeal that they can't deny, and therefore it is her fault. So she is described in Heart of Darkness as a, quote, a wild and gorgeous apparition of a woman. She walked with measured steps, draped in striped and fringed cloths, treading the earth proudly with a slight jingle and flash or barbarous ornaments. She carried her head high. Her hair was done in the shape of a helmet. She had brass leggings to the knee, brass wire gauntlets to the elbow, a crimson spot on her tawny cheek, innumerable necklaces of glass beads on her neck. Bizarre things, charms, gifts of witchmen that hung about her, glittered and trembled at every step. And that's listed on page 56. So she's listed as like a savage, like a sexy savage. And that is obviously her fault, you know, as all women tend to tempt men. So that's Kurtz's call to sin, if you will, where she's kind of pulling him back in and is standing on the shore and tempting him essentially to fall back into his sin and to fall back into their version of hell. And in the Inferno, in Canto 5, Dante encounters Francesca, who has landed herself and her husband's brother in hell. It is quoted that she says, "Love, which in gentlest hearts will soonest bloom, seized my lover with passion for that sweet body from which I was torn unshriven to my doom." And then she also states, "In the depths of hell, Cana waits for him who took our lives." And so Cana is named after Cain and Abel, which insinuates the idea of the circle being reserved for those who betray their family members, obviously as Cain killed Abel. And so it's Francesca's fault. She was the one who is blamed for the fact that her and her husband's brother are in hell. It's really not stated who started the affair, and yet Francesca is the one who is, I don't want to say interviewed for it, but is asked questions about it and is given her perspective on it. And it's not really listed if she blames herself or if she blames her husband's brother. So naturally, it's her fault, you know, as all female literary figures go. And then that's listed on page 49 of the Divine Comedy in Canto 5. So, I mean, there was a lot more points that stood out to me. Like I said, it's currently Lent for us, and I could just think of all the different icons that I could think of in Greek Orthodoxy that would relate to this. Obviously, the one that stood out to me was definitely the Ladder of Divine Ascent, and that's kind of how I depicted in both of these stories, and it's really the first thing that came to mind when I read these stories. And it's interesting to think that both portrayals of hell are shown as a journey, and at the end of each journey, after you get through the worst parts of it, you are granted your release. In the Inferno, after Dante does go through his 9 circles of hell, he does reach heaven on the other side to get to his wife Beatrice. And then within the Heart of Darkness, Marlowe does have to go through this journey that he doesn't quite know why he's on, and yet when he gets to the end of it, his release is that he just kind of gets answers and experience on what different types of sin are, and then comes out in the end alive and safe, in order to spread his ideology and his information to other people. So it was an eye-opening experience, especially during Lent, like I said. So thank you for listening to my rant about, you know, different current time periods such as Lent, Orthodoxy, and things like that in comparison to this. And thank you for allowing me this opportunity to get all cutesied up for you. So thank you.